Elena Moore sat by the window of her small apartment, the city lights flickering softly like distant fireflies, and she felt a quiet emptiness she had grown used to over the past year since her breakup with Daniel Cross, a man who had once promised her the world and then vanished from her life without explanation. She sipped her tea, cold now, and stared at the streets below, seeing couples laughing, friends walking arm in arm, families hurrying home, and it reminded her painfully of what she had lost, of the warmth and connection she once believed would last forever. Yet life had a way of teaching her patience through silence, and tonight, the silence felt heavier than usual, pressing against her like a reminder that the ordinary could never prepare her for the extraordinary. And as she adjusted the cup in her hands, her phone buzzed insistently on the table, and when she picked it up, the name on the screen made her heart skip. Daniel Cross. She hesitated, her fingers hovering, a swirl of emotions running through her: anger, nostalgia, fear, longing, because he had left without warning, leaving her to pick up the shattered pieces of a life she had just begun to rebuild. Yet here he was, appearing again like a ghost she thought she had buried. And the message was brief, polite, asking to meet tonight, saying it was important, saying he needed to talk, and Elena felt an almost involuntary tug in her chest, a curiosity she tried to suppress because she knew that answering could reopen wounds she had carefully closed, could bring back memories that were sharp and unhealed, could make her vulnerable again in ways she had worked so hard to avoid. And yet, despite her caution, she felt drawn to him, to the possibility that some questions could only be answered face to face, that some feelings could not be ignored forever. And after a long moment of staring at the screen, weighing reason against instinct, she found herself typing a simple, hesitant reply. Yes, and in that moment, a strange mix of excitement and dread coursed through her, because she knew that tonight would not be ordinary, that it might shift the balance of her carefully constructed life, that it might stir emotions she had buried and awaken desires she had tried to forget. And as she prepared to leave her apartment, adjusting her coat, straightening her hair, and taking a deep breath, she reflected on the months of quiet she had endured, the nights spent alone with her thoughts, the weekends filled with mundane routines, the small victories of learning to live for herself again, and how fragile that sense of independence was now in the face of his unexpected request. And the city outside seemed to mirror her turmoil, the lights blurring through the rain that began to fall softly, creating reflections that danced like memories on the pavement. As she walked toward the cafe where they had first met, feeling the old tension in her chest, a mixture of hope and fear, wondering if she could face him without falling apart, if she could hear his voice without remembering every hurt, every tear, every promise broken, yet also remembering the laughter, the quiet nights, the dreams they had shared, the warmth of his hand in hers, the way he had made her feel alive. And now, as she approached the familiar cafe, she realized that no preparation could shield her from the weight of seeing him again, the rush of memories, the pull of old emotions, and the small hope that maybe, just maybe, this meeting could bring closure, or a new beginning, or a revelation she had never expected. And as she pushed the door open and heard the soft chime announcing her arrival, she caught sight of him sitting in their old corner, calm yet uneasy, a cup of coffee untouched before him, eyes searching, waiting. And Elena felt her heartbeat quicken, a mix of apprehension and a strange thrill, knowing that the next words spoken, the next moments shared, could change everything she thought she had known about her life, about love, about forgiveness. And as she took her seat opposite him, she noticed the subtle lines on his face that had not been there before, the weariness in his eyes, the way his fingers drummed nervously on the table, and a part of her softened, remembering the man she had once loved deeply, and another part hardened, recalling the pain he had caused, the nights she had cried, the trust she had given away so freely only to have it broken. And yet despite all of this, despite the caution she had built around her heart, she could not deny the pull she felt toward him, the magnetic force of curiosity and unresolved emotion that drew her in, making her lean forward slightly, ready to listen, ready to confront, ready to understand why he had returned after all this time, ready for whatever revelation he had brought to her life on this quiet, rain-drenched evening. And as he opened his mouth to speak, a tension filled the space between them, charged and electric, a fragile bridge between past and present, regret and hope, fear and longing. And Elena realized with a jolt that tonight was the night that could shift everything, could make her laugh, cry, forgive, or fall again, and in that instant, her life hung in the balance, a single decision away from an unexpected journey she could never have anticipated. One that would begin with his words and end with a choice only she could make, and as he looked into her eyes, she felt that quiet certainty deep within. Nothing about tonight would be ordinary, nothing about this meeting would be simple, and nothing would ever be the same again. Elena Moore stepped into the small cafe, the one tucked away on a quiet street, where the scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries mixed with memories she thought she had carefully locked away, and there he was, Daniel Cross, sitting at their usual corner table, looking older, quieter, and somehow heavier, as if life had etched lines of regret into his face and deepened the shadows beneath his eyes, and for a moment, Elena froze, the air between them charged with the weight of unspoken words and the echoes of laughter and love long past, and yet the familiarity was undeniable, the subtle way he adjusted his chair, the nervous glance around the room, the restless tapping of his fingers, all pieces of a man she had once known intimately, a man who had been her everything before life had torn them apart, and as she took the seat opposite him, the world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them and the history they carried, and Daniel's voice, when it finally came, was quiet, hesitant, almost trembling, as he admitted that leaving her had been the biggest mistake of his life, and he spoke of the emptiness that had followed, of achievements that had felt meaningless without her, of nights spent staring at the ceiling and wondering if she had ever stopped thinking about him, and Elena listened, her emotions a turbulent mix of anger, nostalgia, longing, and the faint, stubborn hope that something in his eyes might be genuine, that the apology was real, that the regret he carried could translate into a change, a possibility, a second chance. Yet even as she absorbed his words, she remembered the pain, the tears shed alone in her apartment, the promises broken so easily, and she wondered if opening herself to him again was wisdom or folly. But before she could respond, before she could measure the risk, Daniel leaned slightly forward and made the request she never anticipated, the words catching her breath in her throat as he asked her to spend a month with him, not as lovers, not yet, but as two people trying to understand what they had lost, trying to navigate the delicate balance between the past and what could still be, and Elena felt a strange pull, a mixture of fear and curiosity, because agreeing meant vulnerability, meant risking her carefully rebuilt life, yet it also meant a chance to see the man she had loved, to confront her feelings, to seek closure or perhaps a new beginning, and as she considered it, the world around them seemed alive with small, meaningful details, the warm glow of the lamps, the soft murmur of other patrons, the aroma of cinnamon and coffee blending with the tension between them, and every moment reminded her that this was no ordinary night, that every heartbeat, every glance, every breath was charged with possibility. And as Daniel spoke again, softer this time, explaining that the month was not about rekindling love immediately but about understanding, about truth, about seeing each other honestly after so much time, Elena felt her chest tighten, the gravity of the decision weighing on her, because agreeing meant opening the door to pain and perhaps joy, to memories and new experiences, to facing feelings she had carefully buried but never truly forgotten, and as she looked into his eyes, she saw the vulnerability there, the honesty, the longing, and it mirrored her own, a reflection she could not ignore, a connection that time had never fully erased, and so, after a long pause, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper, a mixture of courage and hesitation, agreeing to the month, setting boundaries, protecting herself as best she could, knowing that what lay ahead would test her heart, her patience, and her ability to forgive, and as they left the cafe together, stepping into the cool night air, the rain had stopped but the streets were still glistening, reflecting the city lights like tiny stars, and Elena felt a strange exhilaration, a mixture of fear and anticipation, knowing that every moment in the coming weeks would matter, every conversation would carry weight, every laugh or silence would be a test, a mirror of what they had once shared and what they might still discover, and as they walked side by side without speaking, the quiet hum of the city around them, she realized that the unexpected request had already begun to change her perspective, making her heart both heavier and lighter, reminding her that love was not simple, that trust was fragile, that emotions were messy and beautiful, and that sometimes the most important journeys began not with certainty but with a single, courageous yes, and in that moment, Elena understood that the path ahead would be filled with joy, confusion, longing, and heartbreak in equal measure, That she would confront memories she had hidden, fears she had ignored, desires she had denied, and that every step with Daniel would force her to face herself and him honestly, without pretense, without shields, without the comfort of distance. And as they reached her apartment to part ways for the night, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and hope, her mind racing with possibilities, imagining the days ahead filled with shared conversations, small gestures of change, moments of laughter, unexpected confessions, silent glances that spoke volumes, and an unspoken promise that neither of them could ignore, that this month would not just be about understanding the past but about discovering whether the love they had once cherished could survive the mistakes, the regrets, and the distance that time had created. And as Elena closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment to catch her breath, she realized that life had a way of presenting choices she could never predict, of creating moments that demanded courage and vulnerability, of offering second chances that required both wisdom and heart. And she knew that whatever happened next, her life had already begun to shift in ways she could not yet fully comprehend, that the unexpected request had set in motion a chain of emotions and events that would challenge her, change her, and perhaps, if she allowed it, heal her. And as she sank onto the couch, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant hum of the city, she understood that tonight was the start of something fragile and powerful, something that would teach her about forgiveness, trust, longing, and the quiet, persistent power of love. And she allowed herself, just for a moment, to feel hope, knowing that the days ahead would not be simple but would be undeniably, profoundly significant. And in that hope, in that anticipation, she felt a stirring in her heart, a gentle reminder that life could surprise her, that love could find its way back, and that sometimes, the most unexpected requests could change a life forever. Elena Moore awoke the next morning with a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness, thinking about the agreement she had made with Daniel Cross, a month together not as lovers yet, but as two people trying to understand what had been lost between them. And even as she prepared herself for the day, getting dressed, fixing her hair, and sipping her morning coffee, she felt her mind racing with memories, worries, and small hopes she could barely name, because each day with him brought both comfort and tension, familiarity and surprise. And when she arrived at their meeting place, the cafe that had witnessed the beginning of their love story, she found Daniel waiting already, his posture slightly relaxed but his expression still carrying that weight of regret and longing that had first drawn her in again. And as they sat across from each other, small talk began, careful and measured at first, about the weather, work, and the little details of life that had continued while they had been apart. Yet underneath the polite conversation lay a current of emotion, unspoken and persistent, and Elena noticed the subtle changes in him, the way he smiled a little more genuinely, how he seemed to listen without interruption, how his eyes softened when she spoke, and it made her heart stir in ways she had not expected, because she realized that while the past had hurt her, the present offered moments of genuine connection that were fragile but real. And as the days passed, these small moments multiplied, taking the shape of shared walks in the park, quiet dinners in tiny restaurants, and long conversations over coffee that stretched into the evening, where they spoke about dreams they had once shared, regrets they had endured, and fears that had lingered like shadows over their lives. And Elena found herself laughing again in ways she had thought impossible, feeling warmth and tenderness she had long denied herself. And yet, even amidst the joy, fear remained, because she knew that this experiment, this month together, could either heal them or shatter everything again. And she had to remind herself constantly to protect her heart, to measure her trust, to balance her desire with caution. And Daniel, aware of her hesitations, made small, consistent gestures to show his sincerity, simple acts of kindness that spoke louder than words, holding the door, offering her favorite pastry, listening without judgment, remembering little details she mentioned in passing. And through these actions, he slowly built a bridge of reliability, a fragile path toward the possibility of reconciliation. And as they spent more time together, Elena noticed her own heart opening in ways she had not allowed for months, the walls she had built to guard against disappointment beginning to soften, letting in moments of hope, warmth, and even attraction. And yet, each day also reminded her of the stakes, because trust could not be rebuilt in a single conversation, and love, once broken, required patience, understanding, and courage to attempt again. And she grappled with memories of betrayal, nights spent crying alone, and promises that had been broken too easily, but alongside these memories, she felt the excitement of rediscovery, the joy of seeing the man she had once loved make genuine efforts to be better, to show change, and to connect on a deeper level without rushing or demanding. And she realized that this month was not just about Daniel, it was also about her own growth, her own ability to forgive, to trust, and to embrace vulnerability once more. And she found herself journaling at night, reflecting on the moments of the day, the small smiles, the shared laughter, the moments of silence that spoke volumes, and the quiet gestures that reminded her of the love they had once shared. And as the week turned into 2, and 2 into 3, Elena began to notice subtle shifts in herself, a willingness to lean into the connection, a softness in her gaze, a lightness in her steps, and the realization that healing was happening gradually, quietly, through the accumulation of small, meaningful experiences that reinforced the possibility of a second chance. And she noticed Daniel doing the same, his confidence returning, his regrets shared openly, his willingness to be honest and vulnerable growing stronger each day. And there were nights when they sat under the stars, their hands occasionally brushing, hearts beating a little faster, the city around them quiet and serene, and the air filled with the unspoken words of longing, hope, and fear. And in those moments, Elena felt the tension between past pain and present possibility, the delicate dance of attraction, caution, and rediscovery. And she recognized that this month was teaching her patience, reminding her that love was not about instant fulfillment, but about understanding, commitment, and the courage to face uncertainty. And she saw Daniel not just as the man who had left her, but as someone who had changed, who had reflected on mistakes, and who was willing to make amends in tangible, consistent ways. And this awareness stirred something deep inside her, a recognition that hearts, though fragile, could grow stronger through honest effort, empathy, and shared vulnerability. And the more time they spent together, the more Elena felt the threads of their past intertwining with the present, creating a tapestry of connection that was delicate, beautiful, and emotionally rich. And she realized that she was beginning to trust him again, slowly, cautiously, yet sincerely, letting the walls around her heart relax, allowing warmth, hope, and affection to seep in. And this trust was not blind, it was earned through each action, each gesture, each word that demonstrated change and commitment. And through it all, Elena felt a renewed sense of self-awareness, recognizing her own capacity to love, to forgive, and to embrace vulnerability without losing herself. And she marveled at how something as simple as spending intentional time together could transform their dynamic, turning old wounds into opportunities for growth, turning pain into tenderness, and turning uncertainty into hope. And as the days continued, she noticed the subtle language of intimacy forming, a look held a little longer than usual, a touch that lingered, a shared laugh that resonated deeply, and moments of silence that spoke louder than words. And she realized that the month was not just about evaluating Daniel, but about understanding her own desires, needs, and emotions, about learning to navigate love without fear, and about seeing the possibility of happiness that she had thought was lost forever. And as the third week approached, Elena felt the emotional stakes rising, because attachment was inevitable, because laughter and shared moments had a way of weaving hearts together, and because the longer they spent together, the more she felt herself falling again, slowly and gently, aware of the risk but unable to resist the warmth and comfort that his presence brought. And Daniel, too, was aware of the growing tension, of the emotional closeness, and he navigated it carefully, respecting her boundaries, showing patience, and proving that his intentions were sincere. And Elena found herself reflecting on what it meant to truly trust someone, to allow love to bloom again after heartbreak, to balance hope with caution. And she realized that this month was teaching her more about herself than about him, about resilience, emotional honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to face feelings she had avoided. And in the quiet moments alone, she recognized that love was never simple, that hearts carried scars, but that connection, effort, and empathy could rebuild bridges. And she felt a growing certainty that, whether this experiment ended in renewed love or painful closure, she had already changed, grown stronger, and opened herself to possibilities she had never imagined. And as the final days of the month approached, the emotional intensity increased, with moments of tenderness, subtle attraction, shared laughter, and vulnerable conversations that made her heart race and her mind whirl. And Elena understood that this was the essence of mature love, messy, beautiful, uncertain, full of risk and reward, and that the month was shaping her into a woman who could love wisely, bravely, and fully, and that whatever the outcome, she would emerge with a deeper understanding of herself, of Daniel, and of what it truly meant to open her heart again. And as she lay in bed one night reflecting on the journey so far, she realized that the unexpected request he had made weeks ago had not just given them a chance. It had changed her perspective, her heart, and her life forever, teaching her that love was worth the risk, patience could heal, and courage could transform even the deepest wounds into opportunities for growth, connection, and possibly a second chance at a love that was waiting to be reborn. As the final week of the month approached, Elena Moore felt an intensity she had not anticipated, a mixture of excitement, fear, longing, and uncertainty swirling in her chest each morning when she awoke and each night before sleep, because the days spent with Daniel Cross had transformed into a rhythm that felt both comforting and charged, where laughter and conversation flowed naturally, yet every glance, every touch, and every pause carried meaning beyond words, and she noticed herself thinking about him constantly, replaying small moments in her mind, the way he smiled when she shared a memory, the way his eyes softened when he listened to her worries, the way his gestures, small and deliberate, spoke of sincerity, care, and a willingness to change, and she realized that this month had not just been about rediscovery but also about courage, both hers and his, as they navigated the delicate balance between past pain and future possibility. And she marveled at how someone could make an ordinary walk feel like a moment suspended in time, how a simple coffee could carry the weight of unspoken emotions, and how silence between two people could resonate more powerfully than any words. And as they spent the days together, Elena felt herself letting go of old resentments, of nights spent replaying heartbreak, of fears that had once governed her decisions, and in their place emerged a cautious hope, an acknowledgement that love could still be nurtured if tended with honesty, patience, and empathy, and she found herself observing Daniel closely, noting subtle changes in his demeanor, the gentleness in his tone, the careful attention to details she mentioned in passing, the sincerity in his eyes, and she recognized that these actions reflected a man who had grown through his regrets, someone willing to invest emotionally rather than rely on words alone, and she felt her heart respond, slowly, cautiously, yet undeniably, with warmth and affection that she had not permitted herself to feel for a long time. And yet, even as the emotional closeness grew, she reminded herself to remain vigilant, to honor the boundaries she had set, because trust was fragile and love once lost required careful cultivation, and she understood that allowing herself to feel this deeply again was both a risk and a gift, because vulnerability could lead to heartbreak but also to profound connection. And as the days drew closer to the month's end, she sensed the unspoken question hanging between them, an invisible tension that neither dared name until the right moment. And that moment came one evening when they found themselves walking under the soft glow of streetlights, the city quiet except for distant sounds of cars and footsteps, and Daniel stopped, turning to face her, his expression earnest, open, and tinged with emotion that mirrored her own, and he spoke in a voice low and steady, confessing that the month had not been merely an exercise in understanding, but a journey to find her again, to show her that he had changed, to reveal that he was ready to choose her, fully and honestly, if she would allow it. And Elena felt her breath catch, her chest tighten, a flood of feelings rushing through her, relief, longing, fear, hope, and a deep, aching desire that she had not admitted even to herself. And as he continued, sharing his thoughts, regrets, and hopes for the future, she realized that everything they had experienced in the past weeks, the conversations, the laughter, the quiet companionship, the gentle gestures of care, had led to this pivotal moment, a crossroads where her decision would shape not just the immediate future but the very direction of her heart. And she understood that love was rarely simple, that choices carried weight, and that the courage to embrace vulnerability was necessary to experience its fullness. And as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she saw truth, accountability, and the possibility of something beautiful, fragile yet strong, a connection tempered by past mistakes and nurtured through deliberate care. And she felt tears form as she acknowledged her own growth, the healing she had achieved, and the readiness to consider a second chance, not as a naive return to old patterns but as a deliberate choice informed by experience, understanding, and emotional maturity. And in that quiet moment, under the stars and the soft hum of the city, she realized that the unexpected request that had brought them together weeks ago had already changed her life, reshaped her heart, and awakened in her a depth of feeling she had long suppressed, and she understood that love, when approached with honesty, patience, and courage, could transform not just relationships but the people within them. And as Daniel reached out, offering his hand as both a gesture of commitment and vulnerability, Elena felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of alignment between her heart and mind, a recognition that choosing to trust, to open herself, and to embrace possibility was both brave and necessary. And she reflected on the journey, the initial hesitation, the cautious days, the growing intimacy, the laughter, the subtle attractions, and the moments of quiet understanding, and realized that every step, every moment, had prepared her for this decision, that the past could not be erased but could inform a wiser, more resilient future. And as she took a deep breath, meeting his gaze with clarity and courage, she felt a profound sense of empowerment, knowing that whatever choice she made, it would be informed by self-respect, emotional insight, and the genuine connection that had grown between them. And she understood that this moment was not simply about rekindling love but about recognizing the capacity for growth, forgiveness, and renewal within herself and within their shared bond. And as they stood there together, the night air filled with possibility, Elena realized that her life had already shifted, that the unexpected request had set in motion a series of events that had transformed her heart, her understanding of love, and her willingness to embrace it fully. And she felt an overwhelming gratitude for the journey, for the lessons learned, for the courage she had discovered, and for the opportunity to experience connection once more, deep and authentic. And as she reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm, she sensed the beginning of something new, a chapter filled with hope, tenderness, and the possibility of lasting love. And she understood that while the future was never certain, the present moment, charged with honesty, vulnerability, and mutual desire for understanding, was enough to give her heart courage, to give her life direction, and to show her that sometimes, the most unexpected requests, made at the right time, could indeed change a life forever, guiding it toward healing, intimacy, and the profound realization that love, when nurtured with care and respect, could bloom again, brighter and more resilient than before. And as they walked slowly through the quiet streets, hand in hand, Elena felt a sense of completeness she had not known she could experience, a recognition that emotional courage, patient connection, and heartfelt honesty had the power to transform hearts, relationships, and life itself. And in that serene, tender night, she knew that her journey with Daniel had reached a pivotal point, not because the past had been erased, but because they had faced it, acknowledged it, and chosen to step forward together, embracing the delicate, beautiful possibilities that awaited them. And she realized with a soft, steady certainty that this chapter would mark a turning point, a moment of emotional awakening, and a foundation upon which love, trust, and shared understanding could grow. And that the unexpected request, made with sincerity weeks ago, had not just given them time together, it had given her life a new heartbeat, a renewed capacity to hope, and a profound sense that love, courageously pursued, could indeed endure, heal, and transform, leaving her heart open, her spirit lifted, and her life forever changed in ways both subtle and monumental.